Welcome to Prose Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Prose and Cons. I am Phoenix. I'll be hosting this one. Planners versus Pantsers. Which one are you? Which one are we? We're about to find out. So we'll just go around really quick, and in the spirit of the episode, I thought it'd be fun to introduce yourself, say which one you think you are, planner or pantser, and then if you want, as an added bonus, you can also throw in what Harry Potter house you are, if you want to, just another identifier.
Snuffledorf?
Yeah.
Snuffledorf?
Snuffledorf.
I don't know.
Actually, before we do that though, I thought I'd take a stab at which one I thought everyone was, because I do have.
I love this.
Yeah. Okay. So I have it broken. Well, I have a spread. So Ali and Matan, who listeners have not met yet, but he's great. Trust me.
Fabled Matan.
Yeah. Ali and Matan, I have you both as planners, solid planners. Alex, and then obviously I know myself, but Alex and myself I have as pantsers, and then James and Patty I have you as hybrids, where to me you are kind of on the line, but if I had to kind of shift you one way or the other, Patty I would shift towards planner, James I would shift into pantser.
It's very intuitive.
Yeah, it is. I plan, but then the plan falls apart. Yeah. So that's
I pants, but then the story goes off the rails.
True. So yeah, Ali, what are you?
Hi, my name is Ali, and I am a planner. And I also identify as a Slytherin.
Right on.
Do these things correlate?
Possibly.
Yes, they would, right? Like, I don't know much about Harry Potter, but Slytherin seem like they plan things.
Yeah. Unintentionally, I think we're about to find some cool correlations here between Harry Potter houses and planners and pantsers. Patty, what I'll throw to you.
I started just pantsing everything when I started writing, but I'm trying to plan more now, which is going well. I've found that I'm going to say I can't get my head around writing a novel without thorough planning. Otherwise, I'll just write myself into corners. So that's what I'm trying, and it's working out okay.
Alex.
Yes. So my name is Alex, and you nailed it, Phoenix. I am very much a pantser. Yes. I'm very, very much looking forward to discussing the difference between those two among all the different people. Incidentally, you would have been the only other person I'd probably pick as a pantser, I think, of this group.
We should probably define this term at some point as well.
Yeah, we were. Yeah, I'm sure we'll get to that.
At the moment, it sounds like we're all running around playgrounds, pulling people's pants down, and I can't unhear it right now.
And who says we're not? Who says we're not? You know, as a bonus, my Harry Potter house. I did the official quiz. I did it fairly recently. I thought I'd be a Slytherin. Turns out I'm a Gryffindor. But apparently, they're quite close.
It's a fine line between like justified righteousness. I think the difference between a Slytherin and a Gryffindor.
Fair.
Yeah, it is. It's. Yeah, knife thin, I think.
Patty, did you have a house? I can't remember.
No.
All right.
Wizard? Well, I think I read the first Harry Potter a long, long time ago. They're fine. I have nothing against them, but I have no knowledge.
We've speculated you as a Gryffindor, I think, if we had to force... Oh, you're a Ravenclaw, potentially.
I was going to say...
That sounds cool. That sounds the most gothy, so I'll take that.
A Ravenclaw? Yeah.
I would put him in Ravenclaw. James, how about you?
Hi, I'm James, and I would definitely be a pantser at heart, but I find if working on something that's too long, the story just goes off in different directions and it kind of never gets finished. So there needs to be a certain amount of planning done, but then too much planning takes away my interest in writing the story. So I'm trying to find the right line for the different length of story, how much planning needs to go in for the size of projects I'm working on. And I'm not sure what house I am. I think I might identify as Ravenclaw. I think we kind of chatted it out one night before, and I think it was probably a cross between Ravenclaw and Slytherin. But I think I've been leaning Ravenclaw.
That checks out.
I never said, but I also identify as a pantser. Definitely at heart, planning comes less as a nature and more as a discipline for me. And then I am a Hufflepuff, a verified,
Yes, you are.
certified Hufflepuff.
They're the chill ones, right?
Proud, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
Very
proud
chill.
Hufflepuff. We got Cedric. It's all good.
That's all we needed.
That's all we need. That's our shining star.
And he did so well, notoriously.
Yeah.
I did like that. How they made him push him. Made him push Harry at the end of the movie. It's like that wasn't written in. That's not canon. Like you didn't need it.
We won't circle too deep into the Harry Potter vortex. What is everyone consuming at this point? What media is everyone diving into? We'll just go back to the top. Allie?
So I'm actually diving back into, funny enough, Legend of Korra. So my housemate and I, we'd finished a rewatch of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and then we're like, well, now we need to watch Korra again, is the logical conclusion. So we're watching that, and I thought it was an excellent example of planning versus pantsing, because Avatar: The Last Bender is an excellent example of a show that is meticulously plotted from the start, beautifully executed, all the character arcs. Korra, however, because of Nickelodeon's commissioning schedule, we're only commissioning one season at a time. So suddenly the creators didn't have the 4-season arc planning they could do that they had originally pulled off. Now they were planning arc to arc, and it is painfully like on display.
It's very obvious.
Yeah, that they try and wrap it up, and then they're like, oh, we got renewed again. So then they kind of scrabble their resources and plan another season, and it's a little bit, they did the best they could, but it is a great shame that Nickelodeon did them dirty.
Petty?
My girlfriend and I just finished season 3 of True Detective. Wow. True Detective is really, really, really well written. It's not perfect. There's definitely some errors, but by gum, I'm not really sure how to sum up why it's great, but if you haven't seen it, I recommend. On that, I'm still reading Moby Dick, still slogging through 800 words of Dick. And I'm about to start an Iranian novel called The Blind Owl, which is meant to be great. It's meant to be very surreal. Character keeps waking up in different lives, and the sort of line between them is blurred. There's the implication of mental illness and opium use. It's meant to be very dreamy, and it got banned under the regime it was written under, which if you want a book to do well, get it banned in the country, because that's going to draw people like flies to honey. Mostly still slogging through Moby Dick. It's good, but
what is the book called?
The Blind Owl.
Oh, that's right.
I think it's The Blind Owl. I haven't started it yet. But yeah, Iranian writing's supposed to be very good.
Alex?
So I started reading a Between, which is basically like a sci-fi thing. There's this like underworld sort of thing where a bunch of people kind of go in and they assume these roles. Like there's one that's sort of like a game maker who's sort of like a marionette controller of everything, and then there's someone else who's like the sword of vengeance and all these sort of different things. It's got kind of video game illusion. It's good. It's a little trashy, but it's fun. And then the other thing I've been doing is just the very last 8 episodes of the first season of Pokemon and rewatched that.
Nice.
And there are elements of that are really good. And then there are other elements of that, Team Rocket, that are just so repetitive and boring. Like just every single episode, Team Rocket come in and you're just like, even as a kid, I don't know
why
how.
Are you rewatching Pokemon? Like, how did that even?
I literally
what?
Yeah, no, I was in my feels a little bit this week, so yeah, I re-went and did that, and I don't regret it.
James?
I just read Shutter Island by Dennis Lehan, which was turned into a film by Martin Scorsese. Everyone might remember as the Leonardo DiCaprio one, where he's like investigating on a mental asylum. As a film, I didn't like it, but as a book, really? I think I like. Yeah, I didn't like it in the ending. I felt it. I just felt they kind of pulled a few fast ones on the audience, whereas I think that kind of ending worked a lot better in a book because it's written in very like minimalist form. All of the details are like very scant, and they're almost written as in things that the character picks up on. So every time he's wrong, it presents this idea that, well, he's wrong about reading people's reactions. He's wrong about noticing details in the room and stuff like this. So it actually works really well for like that detective kind of novel where you're not entirely you don't entirely trust the detective after a certain point.
Yeah.
So it works really well.
Myself, my partner and I just rewatched all the Hunger Game movies, and we just started on the Twilight series. And then in the background, I'm also rewatching Bakano, which is a very good anime. I highly recommend it.
Yeah,
and
I started that. It's about like a train heist, right?
Yeah, but
I didn't really get into it, but maybe I should have watched more than like 1.5 episodes.
I know it definitely picks up after the first episode's slow, and probably about by the third episode is when I'm like, ooh, okay.
And then it's almost too fast. Like it is breakneck.
then it's done. It does non-linear storytelling very, very well.
Yes.
Like, you jump around the timeline so much, and like the main setting is a train, but especially in the early episodes, a lot of the story happens around the train more so than the train itself, and the main setting is actually more cut to every now and then, and it's done very well.
It's so unapologetic in its timeline jumping as well, which I adore. Yeah.
And with that, I guess we'll jump into it. Does anybody have any starting thoughts? Anything?
Yeah, we should probably define what pantsing versus planning is for anyone listening along.
Okay.
Oxford Dictionary defines.
Would a pantser like to take the pantser definition and a planner take the planning definition?
Sure, I'll explain pantsing.
Yeah.
So pantsing, I originally heard this back when I was just a wee sprat, and my friend had started doing creative writing, and he was like, oh, I'm pantsing out this thing for, I think he was doing NaNoWriMo or something. And I was like, what's that? I don't know what you're talking about. And he was like, you write by the seat of your pants, right? So you just kind of make it up as you go, which sounds both thrilling and terrifying at the same time, and kind of is. But yeah, so that's where that definition comes from. It's sort of a writer who will just write and just literally go like, I wonder what happens next. Let's find out what my fingers have to say. So that's pretty much what pantsing is.
And then planning is the exact opposite of that. Someone who is probably too terrified to dive into it without knowing where they are going, or worried, or they've tried it and they're like, the quality I produce when I don't know what I'm doing is just not there. So yeah, the kind of person who feels more comfortable, that they want to sit down, they want to write an outline, they want to kind of get a general gist of their scenes, they want to know their ending, they want to know their character arcs, have that kind of all sorted out in their head before they start putting prose down.
I think we should probably make the statement here that, like, I don't think any of us are either to either style. Like, I think maybe it's like a neurodiversity thing. It's just like, no, my brain just won't do that.
Morally opposed.
Yeah,
ethically, it was hard to get Allie in the room with Alex for a while.
A spiritual objection to people who just won't sit down and concentrate on what they're doing. No, I can appreciate the quality of someone who can pants amazingly. It amazes me. I'm like, wow, I wish I could do that. But when I pants something, I'm like, that's just not up to scratch. I know if I sit down and plan first, then I'm going to get a better product. I'm not going to beat myself up as much as I would have done if I was pantsing. And now I also have less editing to do. So from the way I think and approach it, I can only see win-wins when I'm planning. So that's why I fall into that category.
I see pantsing as like I think if I could plan, I would, because it's just like you've got the whole thing there, and you can just sort of like, I just know where my story starts, I know where it ends, and then I can sort of fill it in as I go. Whereas pantsing, you're just like, well, that makes sense as a story because, stories have a beginning and a middle and an end, but fuck that, I'll just make it up as I go. So it's kind of this frustrating thing. It's a lot of fun, but it's highly inefficient. And as someone who's always trying to look for the most efficient use of his time, it can be very, very frustrating. So there are definitely pros and cons to both, I think, one of the things is something you just brought up before, Phoenix, and I don't want to, just take this conversation and run with it, but it was something specific that you brought up that you said that I relate to. When you write something down and you plan it out the whole way through, you kind of lose your joie de vivre to write it. And I very much fall into that thing because I've tried to do that with one of my sort of novellas and short stories. And I wrote it out. And just after that, I was just like, I just have no no desire to write this now. It's just like it's done. I've put it down on the paper. I don't have a desire to do it. But that if I could do that, it would make things much easier, because then, yeah, like I said, then I could fill in the dots and flesh it out and put it all properly. But yeah, I don't know, for some reason I can't do that.
I think that was I think James actually said that at the beginning, because he planned a bunch out and then lost interest in it. Yeah,
that's definitely been my experience. I find that, the way when you write a first draft, it's kind of like the magic of like the experience of writing, and then you come back and you redraft and you're doing the edits and you're kind of putting it all together and making it work. I found that when I planned something out a lot, I was like, great, that's gonna be so easy to write. I've got it all planned out, first act, second act, third act, I know where it's going. The whole process of writing just felt like that second draft, where I was just doing the craft, and I was like, I don't have any love of this. I don't feel any magic here. So I just felt like they never get finished when I planned them out too much. They actually never get started when I planned them out too much, basically. But then if I just go completely off book and I just start with like a feeling, and I just start, I wonder what this feeling is, and I wonder who these characters are, and I wonder what they're doing, the story can just go off in like different directions, and I can be like, oh, this is unfeasible as a story once I kind of get too far into it. Like, so I'm trying to find the right balance between both of those.
I do relate to that as well. I had a similar experience with my most recent screenplay. So I have a pretty regimented routine where I use sticky notes on a wall. Like that's my method, especially for my screenplays. I got to have all the beats, all the scenes just mapped out beforehand, and just that mapping out took like a fortnight. And like every day, so working full time on this thing for a fortnight, and then I had it done, and then I congratulated myself, patted myself on the back, and I'm like, screenplay written. And then it actually took me a little bit to come back to it, because I'm like, oh, I need to do the thing where I write the screenplay. So it is just it is a discipline thing of getting over the hump. But I do like a little bit of gap in time between that planning phase, my sticky note phase, just enough time to kind of forget it a little bit. And then I can come back to it. And then I've got this outline that I'm like, oh, what was I on about? And I have then the freedom to change my mind, just because I've given myself enough of a gap, enough rumination time to be like, oh, well, I was dead set on that plan at the time, but now that I'm writing out the scene, I'm going to try it a little bit different in the moment. So for me, I'm not beholden to that really strict plan. I will do the strict plan, but then I will still give myself a bit of freedom to improv when I'm in the scene, I guess. And I do like sometimes that's where the magic almost happens, where I make that just new decision in the moment and go off book a little bit.
So there is a certain sense of improvisation in that anyway. It's just kind of it's sort of like a magnified down version of that. It's smaller chunks. Do you ever find, because that's another thing, like when you're writing, sometimes something completely off the wall will happen. You're like, wow, I didn't see her doing that. Does it ever, like when you're going through it, like you feel that tug to do something like different, and then go like, oh, hang on, I'm constrained by these parameters that I've set. Like, how do you react to that?
It's usually the sense that I will write it to what I've planned, and I'm like, that didn't land how I needed it to land. So I'm like, that was the plan. I executed it. It's not good enough. It's usually I need to push it more. I have a style of kind of underwriting or being a bit subtle. So I'm like, cool, if my outline was a bit subtle, now that I'm in it, I've done this process enough times that I know that I'm like, I need to go a little bit bigger in the moment than what my plan dictated. So I've learned to trust those instincts and just push it a little bit more when I do get to the actual writing phase.
Yeah. I feel like in the end, like, I feel like most will probably agree with this. Like I kind of said before, my nature is pantser, but that doesn't mean I leave planner out the door. Like, you need both, and usually one is just more natural for you, and one is where your discipline comes in. Planning is something I need to hold myself down and get myself to do, but it's what improves my stories quite a bit. And especially once I started getting into more like long form writing, Pat, you mentioned before, like with your novels and stuff, like that's when it's needed, because you need to zoom so far out to see how everything plays together. Like for me, it became necessary, versus like I just submitted some pieces to a flash fiction contest, and really in the end, like a flash fiction is more or less just a scene, and like you can hold that all in your head at one time, but when you start stringing scenes together, you're holding way more in your head at one time, and you need to I need to start getting that out of my head so I can look at it, because otherwise I can't hold it all in my mind at once.
This makes me wonder if there's a correlation with us, between those of us who prefer pantsing and short story writing. Because Ali does screenplays. She's a proper writer. She's actually a writer, whereas we just write.
We're all proper writers here.
We are. I'm being self-deprecating. Long form, I'm not going to say it needs planning, but it definitely leans toward planning because it is so complex. You necessarily have lots and lots of moving parts, and unless all the pieces just serendipitously end up linking up with each other, it's going to be a bit of a mess. You guys who pants over here and here, do you guys prefer short stories as a medium?
Well, I certainly towards short stories for sure. Like what I'll find about short stories is I'll do one, and then it'll be finished to some degree, and I'll be like, that didn't really go where I want it to go, and then I'll think, well, what if this changed like that, and then I'll change something, and then like it'll link up to a different place, so I'll have to essentially write two different halves of the story, and I'll find that second half kind of works a little bit better. But yeah, that's an interesting jump between like pantsing and short story writing. But I very rarely short story and just like wow, oh, it's perfect as it is. Even that I need to go back and often radically re-edit. It's just easier because it's smaller, you know?
Yeah, it's an interesting instinct, because I definitely went long form trained straight away. And it's only kind of now I'm diving into the exercise of writing more and more short stories, and I'm finding I do need to underplan them, because if I plan them too much, my word count blows out. I'm like, I need as minimal roadmaps as possible, and then I am just gonna fill it in with words, and then I'm like, then it's done. Something interesting is happening with my historical fiction I'm writing. So book one, it's 2 timelines, and how I mapped it out is, as I was going, I was writing both timelines interweaving. So that means when I plotted it first, I knew both timelines, and I knew when I was going to cut back and forth between them, even before I started writing. I did that planning upfront. Now I'm contemplating book 2, and I actually really scared myself off how massive that planning it's going to be huge, and that kind of held me back from diving into it. I guess the first time around I had enough enthusiasm that I was able to dive into that planning and really enjoy it, but this time it was almost like a mental barrier. I'm like, that's too big, I can't climb that mountain, and yet I wanted to start writing it, so I'm like, I'm going to do the other thing, the pantsing thing, and see if that allows me to get past this mental block. So instead of, I've now separated the 2 timelines, and I just planned one. I happily set the other timeline aside. I'm not going to interweave it in. I'll do it second. And now I mapped out this timeline, still a bit of planning, just not as big as the full thing. And I'm just diving into this one. And so breaking it up like that helped that kind of mental block that maybe some writers get when they see planning as just too huge, too big. That can absolutely get overwhelming, even for someone who likes planning.
One thing that came up for me, and maybe some of you will relate to this, but because I started in children's books, and I found that because you're limited, the industry standard is around 500 words, and if you start going over that, the most I've seen on a submission page is 600 words, and that I was like, whoa, no way. But so you're very limited, and I found that I didn't have much space to move, but I still liked the medium. But anyway, I started working my way, and I was really excited at the idea of writing a novel, but quite literally, I didn't yet have a novel idea. And I found that I had trouble planning previous novels because I didn't actually have the full novel. I had to be honest with myself. This isn't a novel. There's not enough story here.
It's a short story you
And
extrapolate out to make bigger, right?
Yeah, or like a cool idea.
Yep.
That's like, yeah, a cool idea, but there's not enough here. As opposed to just recently I had something that actually dropped in that was a novel, and now it's like, it's easy. Like, it's not, I haven't gotten into deep planning yet, but it's like, it feels fully different. It's like, oh yeah, there's a full story here. There's a full world here. Like, it writes itself, it feels like. It's a very different feeling, but I did have to get very honest with myself and scrap a lot of work in the past because of that.
I had to think of a con for planning, especially in television. So I'll just go on a bit of a TV spiel for all the listeners out there. So the reason we're so wrought towards planning is because how you pitch an idea is you got to pitch all the development docs up front. You got to be able to pitch your TV Bible, the series outline. So you don't even get to the commissioned scripting stage until you've planned the whole thing. So it's the horse before the cart. You'd be seen as wasting your time and everyone else's time if you need to script to find the story first before you pitch the idea. That's seen as just a massive waste of time in the industry, I guess. And you're allowed to disagree with that. Sometimes I do like finding the story through scripting it, but that's just how it is. It's how the machine works. But I find with that kind of just brutal planning, to the detriment of like just good creative ideas, like planning at that level is where I see a lot of tropes get repeated, because you're on a timeline. You've got to fill the plot in with something. So that's how you fall into formula. That's how you fall onto, oh, this has been done before. We know it works. It's the safest option. We take it. And that's where poor old TV does get its reputation for doing that sometimes, because it is planning up front and doesn't allow that raw cultivated rumination experience that I do greatly admire in the true pantser, who can just go and do what they want, let their story run onto rocky shore and into like weird ground, and then be like, oh, okay, that wasn't correct, but I have the freedom to tow it back and go somewhere else.
It sounds so romantic.
It does.
Everyone wants the style that they can't do.
I would say there's an awful lot to be said for like writing yourself into a corner and then being like, how do the characters get out of this?
Yeah.
You're like, I really have to push the boundaries of like what this world is capable of doing and like what the characters might decide to do, which is a lot of fun. You can end up with like some really original stuff that way, because you never expected it to come out. But there's also a sense of, if you have you might know that there's like a confrontation coming between two characters, but if you're writing as you go and you're writing as you go, you kind of end up just finding out all these little random details about characters that you might just drop in as like flavor. You're like, oh, I need them to like spend time doing something before this, and they end up coming up with some weird hobby, and then that weird hobby might be like their special talent, and it might play into the confrontation in some way. And that's one of my favorite things, is when you end up with a scene that maybe you thought was going to be kind of like by the numbers, but ends up being like something completely different, completely because of something that you hadn't even come up with. It was just something that you found along the way. That's one of my favorite things about writing that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
When a character sort of discovers something like that, and then you're suddenly like, oh, you were a side character, but you're actually a big deal. Like, and then you kind of do that for a little bit, and then you're like, wait, how did this get into this bit? And then suddenly, just when you're like, I find some of the pantsing stuff will happen. I mean, some of it is literally at the keyboard, but some of it'll just be like you're just walking along eating a sandwich, and you're like, that's why that happened. That's why I wrote that in, because now he can do this and then that. Like, so that's when that happens. There's kind of a weird little magical, like, okay, cool, I see it. But that's sort of a shot in the dark as well. Like you kind of just have to hang around for that little chestnut of story to just sort of fall in your lap. And it does eventually, I find. So I mean, like in the one I'm doing in the book I'm doing right now, there's like it was like this. There's these three siblings, and they're sort of like fighting, and they have this relationship. And I had to go through and write the whole thing, and have like there were some really, really weird detours that I just had to write out, because I'm like, that doesn't make sense. There's not, like, you can't be in a giant room within a house. It didn't make any sense. Anyway, so then I discovered that one of the siblings actually sort of turns into the villain, and that sort of brought the whole thing full circle. And then I was like, oh, okay, well, that's why their two relationship is a bit closer than with this one. And he sort of ends up being a big bad, and like it all just came together. I actually came up with that by spending some time away from it and just sort of sitting on it. So I guess in a sense that is planning, really. It's just its own sort of form of it. Like, I don't know, there's always the fear that if you're pantsing, like, does anyone else feel like if you're just writing and you're like, well, if I write, 3,000 words in a day, surely the last 1,000 are going to be like a bit iffy, right? Which I don't think is a logical thing, but it's just a weird little thing that goes in my brain. I'm like, I need to ration these out to make. So I don't know.
What you're describing is what I call rumination. Just the value of not writing when you are in the middle of a project, being able to do other menial tasks, so your brain's on something else, but you don't actually realize how much work is actually happening in the back of your brain, that you do have your eating the sandwich moment of, oh my God, that's how it fits together. And for me, I rationalize that as that's me planning, because then I whip out my phone where I have my massive document that automatically syncs to my laptop, and I just bash that thing in where I'm like, that actually goes there, and that's my outline changing on the fly, and doing that, and then I'm like, cool, that's my outlining document updated for when I go and sit down at the laptop next time.
Yeah, right. But like in my case, I might not necessarily know, and I'll just be like, oh, this nebulous thing is going to happen somewhere, and I kind of just have to find my way to it on the keyboard. And sometimes you don't, sometimes it goes around, and you're like, well, I guess not.
I heard that in Breaking Bad, Jesse Pinkman was originally written to be a side character. He was going to be a redundant character who was going to die, I think, at the end of the first season. Then they got the actor, Aaron Paul, and they saw his performance. They're like, holy shit, he's a main character. Like, they realized during the writing process that this guy is a main character. Like to what you were saying, James, like sometimes something in a story just demands to be true. And you're like, oh, right, like the story is telling itself to you. If they had if they had structured Jesse Pinkman to die, the show would have been so much worse off for that.
Something else altogether.
Yeah. I don't have any examples of that in my own writing, but I think it happens to everyone. I'm assuming to even like hardcore.
I think the one with Breaking Bad was quite rare because I think they had to stop midway through the first season because of a writer's strike.
So they had that freedom to do that. Yeah.
They'd filmed a few, they'd shot, like either filmed or shot a few episodes.
The benefit of taking a break.
Yeah. But I think they had just seen how well their chemistry worked on screen, and they were like, this works really well and we should keep him around.
I like that you chose to say chemistry.
Yeah. I think it was the first scene midway through. How do I say this? The first season broke halfway through, and then Tuco, I think, beat one of his own bodyguards to death. I think that was supposed to be Jesse. I think Walter was meant to be like really guilt-ridden about it. Yeah, so
right.
They broke just in time.
It's all the better.
I think it was.
I do have an example that has just occurred to me of when I have abandoned the plan of a scene midway through, because in the lead up to this podcast, I'm trying to think of, do I have any examples? And then I'm like, well, no, I don't think I do, because I do plan. But I did just think of one that I had quite recently where it's basically a two-hander, two characters, and I knew they were going to have an argument. That was the planning I had done. I knew what the argument was about, even to the point I already had like snippets of dialogue was in my planning document, because they had already like argued in my head the days beforehand. So I just had those down even before I got to the scene. And I kind of had a sense that I thought one character was going to be responsible for the argument, making the other one really sad. But when I finally sat down at the keyboard to write it, it actually reversed, where the main character ended up being the one who was being an asshole and making the, quotation marks, what I thought was the villain character, making him sad. And then I got to the end, I'm like, that makes much more sense for the characters. I'm like, that's a better character choice. I'm really glad that happened in the moment. So I kind of planned it in what was quite a black and white way. The villain was going to make the hero sad in the argument, but it reversed itself on the page. And I'm like, that good. I'm glad those instincts kicked in. I just let the characters change the dialogue. And And yeah, so I absolutely do embrace it when it happens. I actually love those moments, but I'd be terrified to try and write a scene without even having some kind of blueprint to start with.
I guess it's the yin yang, right? There's a little bit of planning in even the most improvisational writer, and a little bit of improvisation in even the most planning writer. Like you can't have one without the other to an extent. Although I'd say someone could be a hardcore improviser and just never have any inkling of a plan. I can't think of any writers that do that. Stephen King's a renowned improviser, but I'd say he has some idea.
I think maybe that comes from experience as well. Like someone like Stephen King, for example, has just done it so many times that like he's like, I can just make this story and it'll get there. It's sort of that, maybe it's almost that fake it till you make it sort of thing. Like I come recently and like there's a lot of intertextual stuff there, and I'm like, I'm not sure this could have just been made. Like this had clearly been the work of someone who'd sort of sat down and like pieced. Okay, like it literally starts at the end, like saying like this girl died and killed a bunch of people. Now we're gonna do some.
Carrie is the one about the psychic girl, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
It didn't have much of a pantsed feel to it. I mean, I could be wrong, but that true like no, I'll just make it all up as I go and just do it once and not even have to go back and do it. And I think maybe that's a product of just that endless repetition. Like that guy's written like 50 books, right?
Yeah, no, Stephen King says one thing, but I think he actually does the other thing. I think you're right.
So you think he's a closet planner?
yeah, I think he is. No, I think Alex has absolutely hit it. He's like, Stephen King's like, yeah, I just sit down, it just happens. And it's like, yeah, because you've done it a million times.
All your books are the same.
He's just justifying his bad endings. He's like, I didn't have an ending when I started.
Does he not write endings well? I've never really read any Stephen King. Is that something the guy's known for?
Well, as a big Stephen King fan, I think that like the journey is so good that the ending is a letdown. Other people would say that his endings are just terrible.
It's actually a good thing to cover. I have a feeling that pantsers probably don't get the best endings. Like the planned ending is the end where everything wraps up full circle. And if you're a pantser, you get lost, like the TV show Lost, where it's like, we wrote ourselves into a corner, ba-dum-bum.
Yeah,
that's the end.
There's a sense of like
letterbox.
When you get to like the end of the second act, and I'm like, this is the part where cohesion happens, and it's just like, oh, look at my first act, and look at now what I have, and I'm like, I don't have a story. Make something up, and hopefully
that's exactly why I started planning with my novel, because I don't want that to happen. Like I want it to have a message, and I don't want it to end and be like, just a bunch of stuff that happened. I don't know.
That's life.
And that
yeah, exactly. Like a shitty punchline.
Who am I to tie up the threads of life? Here you are. Here we are.
That's one of
a mess.
In my editing, I am a big fan of if I get to my ending and my ending's not what I planned and it's different, I'm like, well, that's now a first act problem. So rather than like fighting to adjust my act 3, I usually go back and then spend all the time reworking act 1, because by the time I'm at my end, I'm usually happy with my end. That is what I wanted to say. It just took a whole book for me to work it out.
But you know how it's going to end in advance generally, right?
Vaguely, but that's kind of when the dominoes start happening as I'm writing, and if I am embracing this improvisation and things are changing, the butterfly effect gets more and more. So sometimes my ending might be slightly different, and I've abandoned some things, embraced some other things, to the point where my act 1 is no longer the correct act 1 for my act 3. And it's usually at that point, rather than fighting with the act 3 again, it's go back to the start, make that the right setup for where I've ended up.
Yeah, I've definitely that recently. Like with having finished it and gone like, okay, I'm okay with it. All makes sense based on what's happening. Then if we look back to Act 1, there's some serious torsion in that dramatic arc. So it's like, well, okay, I'm gonna have to set those dominoes up and tweak this. And then there's 1 or 2 scenes that you're really like, oh, okay, let's maybe move that around. But I think you're right. It tends, because once you've got your ending and you like your ending, you're like, well, okay, I'm happy with that. Let's go back and rejig this so it all goes there. And it doesn't seem to take that much. Usually it's only a few major tweaks, and like from what I've seen so far.
Just so after all of this, just a general comfort message to all the listeners out there. If you find yourself deep in a novel, and you're finding that certain things don't line up or you don't quite know where it's going. You're not the only one. Also, I was in a meeting held by Writing New South Wales, or just like anyone could attend sort of thing, and they had these two authors on, and it was very therapeutic for me because I was currently feeling my way through the dark on a novel, and then this other one of the authors that they had speaking was like, "Oh, I'm writing a mystery whodunit killer novel. I don't know who the killer is yet," and I was just like, "Oh, thank you for saying that."
That's brave.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly the genre I thought, like, all of the pieces, like the dominoes need to be carefully arranged. Like,
it's the one where they say you should start at the end and work your way back.
Yeah. I've heard that as well. He literally has the last scene first and then writes backward.
I loved it as like it's a cool approach to writing that sort of genre, because it's like, all right, I have the characters, let's throw them into an environment, let's see who kills who. Like, let's see what happens.
You would need to go back and plant the clues though, right? Like the audience has to be able to work it out. I'm no expert in like crime mystery, but if you don't have, like, if it couldn't be worked out, it's almost like, what was the point of the puzzle?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, if you know what I mean. Like the pacing of that kind of story is all about the red herrings that the detective is following and why they think it's this way and why they think it's that way. So if you haven't, I don't know how you would write that story if you're not sprinkling everything that's happening on the edges of that
just
path,
be deeply unsatisfying.
I think you have to love editing if that's your approach.
True.
You got to love your pantsing, but I think you got to love your editing more if you're going to do that to yourself.
Yeah, and that's the thing with pantsing. You got to edit a lot because you're gonna wind up with a big steaming pile of something.
That's true.
You're gonna have to really go back and work it out.
It's just giving all the hard work to your future self, really.
Yeah. You're like,
this is the fun part. I'm just having so much fun.
In saying that, though, as someone, say if you do really tightly plot your first draft, you're still going to need to edit. And that, if you get really attached to your plan, it can be like tearing off a limb, needing to abandon the plan once you've written it and you realize it's not working. You're like, I do need to shuffle these puzzle pieces around. I need to have you need to have permission to let go of what you've just written, even if you have put a lot of planning into it. You need to accept when it's not working. I think a lot of planners fall into the trap of, well, no, I did it, and then I did it, and it's done. You still need to go through that organic editing that a pantser would go through. You just got to be real with yourself that it's still a first draft, no matter how you got to it. It's going to need work.
Yeah.
True. With that, I think we'll transition on a little bit. And Patty, I think you found some stuff to read this time.
I do. Now, some of you guys may have already heard this. I apologize if already you've heard it. This is a little section from the thing I'm writing at the moment. It's novel length. It's called Sovereignty. Doesn't matter what it's about, but basically there's a character who is very male, who has a conflict with his neighbor. His family's gone over to a barbecue. He doesn't want to go to the barbecue because he thinks it would be showing weakness. Instead, he decides to mow the lawn in a way, the most aggressive act of lawn mowing you can have, loud and interrupting the party next door. There it was, his new, red, petroleum-powered Grassmaster, a plant-decimating engine of lawn subjugation. The thing was 10 horsepower, the power of 10 horses. He imagined a horse and all the power put out by those sinewy, muscular legs, then tried to imagine 10 of that. He couldn't do it. That was how powerful this mower was. He hauled it, all 40 kilograms of its sublime mechanical weight in one strong hand, bicep engorged, out into the front yard, where he set it down upon the furthest corner of that which would be mowed. He admired his machine in the light. Beautiful, powerful, the power of 10 horses behind his sturdy grip. He looked out at the house across the street, where his wife and children were unknowing hostages, heard the bass notes spilling out from Bill's domain. But with this mower in his hands, all the sting seemed to fade away. He hoped that some of the party guests, either leaving early or peeking over Bill's side fence at him, would see him there from across the street and quietly say to one another, "Hey, there's Mark. Well, he's not hiding indoors at all. He's mowing. He's mowing like he doesn't give a damn." And they'd be right. He doesn't. He wrenched back the pull cord on the magnificent machine and it roared into life. Just one pull, This was truly a high-performance instrument. He felt the pulses of its mighty engine vibrating through his arms, rumbling like the rutting growl of a huge bison or the purring of a prehistoric jungle cat, an alpha predator. At his merest push, it glided across the grass like a scythed chariot, cutting down its myriad tiny foes without so much as feeling the resistance. Beneath its thunder, he couldn't even hear Bill's idiotic music. It was powerless against him now. He looked out across the street and smiled the easy smile of a man in control of his destiny. I'll leave it there. I could read more, but I think that's enough.
Every time you said the power of 10 horses,
I lost it. I was muted, but I guffawed.
That's an example of a scene that I didn't plan. It just came to me, like the lawnmower, the power tool as the extension of the phallus almost, the masculine, what's the word, prosthetic that power tools are. And I knew that I had to work that into the scene. And yeah,
Your novel is my favorite novel. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah,
it's very
Thank
good.
you very much. I really appreciate that. I haven't touched it in months. I've been so freaking busy with making a living. But I really want to get back into it.
Alex, were you about to say something?
Oh, yeah, no, I was just about to ask in terms of the pantsing, like, so had you planned out the previous scene, then you finished writing that and you were just like, oh, I'm just going to go into this now.
I knew that he would have this ongoing, unreasonably aggressive sort of rivalry with his neighbor Bill. And I know there's a series of scenes where I want the tension to ratchet rather. So I've got an idea of like tension's going to ratchet this way, this way, and this way. That's about it. And the things in between, I just improvise based on what would be the right thing to happen, I guess, for lack of a better term.
We're all just sitting down trying to find the best of the best thing.
Yeah, there we go.
So I do have a quote. This one's a little bit different in the sense that it's not an author speaking sort of outside of their fiction. It comes directly from The Lord of the Rings, The Return. No, not the third one. It's The Fellowship of the Rings.
The Return of the Tower.
The Return. So this comes from when they're in the present. They're meeting Galadriel for the first time. So they're in Lothlorien, and this is the first time Frodo's seeing Galadriel and her partner Celeborn. I know all these names now. So and I just love the way that they described, well, them, but specifically their eyes. They were clad wholly in white, and the hair of the lady was of deep gold, and the hair of the Lord Celeborn was of silver long and bright. But no sign of age was upon them, unless it were in the depths of their eyes, for these were keen as lances in the starlight, and yet profound, the wells of deep memory. And I was just like,
oh my God. I actually got goosebumps hearing that. Like, that is really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I've not read any Tolkien, but goddamn.
Yeah, that was The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien.
Rings,
if you haven't heard of it, yes.
Well, that is one way to introduce elves, so they don't leave the zeitgeist for however many decades.
Yeah.
What an intro.
Mm-hmm. And that, you know what? Chances are he knew Celeborn and Galadriel were going to be there, but maybe he described them in the moment. Who knows?
Maybe the long hair was an improv.
Yeah, who knows?
Just as the TV show is apparently choosing to ignore long hair.
No. Okay. And for that, I think we'll start to close down there. Does anybody have any closing thoughts? Anything they want to say on pantsing or planning?
Not on pantsing or planning, but I'm going to do the most shameless of self-plugs. At the moment, and actually Phoenix as well, are editors for hire. We are freelance editors. If you out there in listening land have anything that you want proofread or edited, reach out to Phoenix or myself, and hopefully we'll have the foresight to put our social media details in the description of this video, and we will work out a deal and edit it for you, and it will be great.
Mm-hmm.
And where is the best platform to find you on?
Probably Fiverr, but I don't know the URL for my Fiverr gig, so I won't say it now and hope that I put it in later.
Yeah, I'm on Fiverr as Feather, and that's F_ether. As well as if you type in manuscript in the search, usually I pop up. And then on Instagram, I'm Bent Light Writing. And that's where I am most places.
Ali, you're on Twitter.
I am on Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah.
Slowly building a following.
Yes.
We can maybe talk to it more next time, but I'm experiencing fandom for the first time, and it's kind of scary.
Nice. I've gotten little tastes of that, very, very micro tastes, and it's like, whoa, you read me without me asking you. That's amazing. All right. And with that, I think we'll sign off. Thank you all for listening very much, and we'll talk to you next time.
You're listening to Prose and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.